Okay, so I think this is gonna be the last day that we do this year because we're almost done. All right, so we did the svara yesterday that that there are really two aspects of Chukos Hagoyim. There's the universal and the particular. Universal is I'm just going to read it again because it was clear. Inin haklali ino iser avodah zarah gufa ella dehava iser latanai mukdam avodah zarah. The general iser, so the general theme is not the prohibition of avodah zarah itself, but is a prohibition on the precondition of avodah zarah, hu chaim bilti hagionim. That's the life of the irrational. Ratzlomer avodah zarah hi kamo ilan hatzmeach mitoch adam miyuchedes v'hi hachaim habilti hagionim. Meaning that avodah zarah is like a tree that sprouts in a specific soil, and that's the irrational life. Hachaim habilti hagionim habian inyan haklali shel chukos hagoyim. I'm just going to read it in English. The irrational life is a general theme or general idea in the chukos hagoyim, and includes all the superstitious behaviors, but it is not worship of a strange god. Rather, they are the paths of irrationality from which avodah zarah flows. Now we can understand the relationship between avodah zarah and gilui arayos regarding chukos hagoyim, because the common denominator is the life of the irrational, which is the life of the yetzer. And once since being drawn after the fantasies of the heart pertains to the general matter, then that's why the two isurim are related. Okay, but then he says there's a particular isur, which he says of chukos hagoyim, which is the prohibition of the gavra to demonstrate or to. I always have a hard time translating laharos. To show himself, to demonstrate himself, to reflect outwardly as someone who is living the life of the irrational. Since the nature of the Isser is an Isser of demonstration, so then it can be found in three areas. So then it goes through the hair, the garments, and the house, which all are different ways that halacha treats ways to reflect the status, right? The hair being like haircuts, clothing being, like an avelus, or in what did he say for clothes? Kohanim, yeah.
Interesting thing that the names isn't part of that, because that's like the measures.
Right.
The
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting.
Those two and then names, not those two and then
right.
names.
Although what I would say, my understanding of that Rashi and Shemos is that that's what made the Jewish people distinct in the sense of it prevented them from assimilating, not because, but the names are not necessarily intrinsic to, avodah zarah or its opposite, Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, it's also funny because not that this would prove or disprove anything, but Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, Zarah got named like avodah zarah names, and you got to wonder also. I don't know who talks about this, but you got to wonder if Bas Paro's naming him Moshe was, I'm Mishisihu. They had beliefs about the Mayim, it's this interesting
also,
thing.
I'm pretty sure,
also Esther. But that's
right. Esther Mordechai, right.
But I'm pretty sure. I don't know where I got this from. I'm pretty sure I heard from somewhere, I read somewhere that Moshe was like an Egyptian name or something like that.
Right.
Or that he had an Egyptian name. One of the two, I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, plain shot of the pasuk is that it's an Egyptian name, right? I mean.
That's true. Well, except for the fact that it's Minamayim Mishisiyu, which is like Lashon HaKodesh, right?
Yeah, that's Lashon HaKodesh, but the fact that she named him. I mean, plain shot is that she named him an Egyptian name. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So now this is the new part. So in light of all this, the expression chukos hagoyim is reference to two inyanim. Inyan haklali, the universal thing. Ratzlomer hareka shemimeno tzomachas avodah zarah, the backdrop from which avodah zarah sprouts. The inyan haprati, and the particular. Ratzlomer ha'isur laharos es atmo k'misha shayach l'inyan haklali. Which is the prohibition to act or demonstrate yourself as someone who relates to the universal. Through this, kavanas kriyas ha'halachos b'shem hilchos avodah zarah b'chukos hagoyim, so now we can say that the title avodah zarah b'chukos hagoyim, the chukos hagoyim is relating to the universal, not the particular. Shezeh kol harbe mitzvos k'gon menachish v'kozim, that includes many mitzvos. So that knocks out the question of why are you calling it based on these two things if there's only one mitzvah and three halachos of chukos hagoyim? Yeah, one mitzvah and three halachos about the inyan prati, but the Inyan Klali pertains to many of the mitzvahs.
Can you explain this idea of the universal in particular again?
Yeah. So the universal is the isser it's prohibiting the pathways of the life of the irrational. Okay, and those pathways are through all these superstitious ways of thinking and acting. Okay, like omen reading and worrying about believing fortune telling and astrology and all this other stuff and consulting the dead.
Not avodah zarah.
No, so that's the thing. It's related to avodah zarah,
Okay.
and it is the soil from which avodah zarah sprouts, but it's not worship of another god. Okay, so that's the Inyan Klali.
That's what this is going.
Chukos Hagoy refers to two things. Chukos Hagoy refers to the universal and the particular. The universal is all of these irrational modes of behavior which fertilize, the avodah zarah tree.
Right.
Okay, but then the Inyan Prati is to demonstrate the status of the Gavra as one who is living a life of the irrational, and that's the haircuts, the circuses, and the garments. So in the title Hilchos Avodah Zarah Chukos Hagoyim, our question was premised on the fact that there are 50 mitzvos of avodah zarah and only one mitzvah of chukos hagoy. But now what he's showing is no, there are mitzvos of avodah zarah, and then there are many mitzvos of chukos hagoy in the universal sense, right? That the menachesh and kosim and dorshal mesim and all that other stuff, those are all part of chukos hagoy also. And it's a fitting title because the Torah is trying to uproot the tree and get rid of the soil,
Right.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think so. But is he trying to line up as chukos hagoyim as one of these is either universal or particular, and the other one is one of these is universal and one of these is particular?
No, chukos hagoy is both. There's two dimensions of chukos hagoy. Yeah. And that's also why the Torah can say, don't follow the chukos hagoyim by doing all these sexual behaviors. Because you can say, well, what do you mean? If chukos hagoy means cutting my hair, what does that have to do with sleeping with an animal or with my mother? So his answer is no. Chukos hagoy is the Inyan Klali is the universal life of the Yetzer immersed in the irrational, which is going to find expression in the instinctual outlets of sexuality and also in the it's in the Los Asura. It's going to be the world of the taivas and the world of thoughts and beliefs. That's the universal thing. But then there is one particular thing that the Torah is trying to prohibit, which is specific, categories of action that reflect the status of the Gavra. Okay, so then he says.
But again, somebody who does a menachesh.
Right.
They're not chayiv misa for avodah zarah, right?
They are chayiv for violating menachesh, which I think is malchus.
So that's that works well then.
Yeah, it does. Right.
Meaning, if it was like a prat of avodah zarah, then you would think that it would be more than malchus, no?
Yes and no. I mean, avodah zarah is stringent, but not all of the isurim that are relating to avodah zarah itself are chayiv misa. Like that. The Torah doles out punishments for different considerations. Okay. Yeah. Good try though. Yeah. Okay. Now there's answering another question. This is why the Rambam brings the Tosefta, which remember just had the list of all of the particular Darkei Hayamori. He brings that as the source for chukos hagoy, even though the Tosefta only has two particulars that involve the actual isur for chukos hagoy, the hair cutting. Okay, why? He says Tosefta kalola shnei isurim pratim b'soch ha'isurim minin haklali shel chukos hagoy kagon menachesh v'kosim. The Tosefta includes two particular isurim within the general prohibition, universal prohibition that encompasses all the superstitious behaviors, which reflect the nature of the particular isur in relation to the universal. Oh, this answers another question. This explains why the Rambam writes the laws of the superstitious behaviors in Perek Yud Aleph, which begins with chukos hagoy, and there's no interruption between the hair, garment, and buildings of the first three halachos and the shaving off of the peos in chapter 12. Because shaving the peos and getting gashing on the skin for the dead. Those are prohibitions of the avodah zarah behaviors that the avodah zarah did. Which is the general framework in which there's the particular isser. So in other words, in the halachos there, our question was premised on the fact that that only these first three halachos are about chukos hagoy, because that's and the rest are not. And then why does he go back to haircutting? But the answer is no. These are the only three that are the chukos hagoy haprati, but the chukos hagoy haklali encompasses all the rest of this parak, which is all the prohibitions of superstition, and all of the next parak, which is about the other practices of the avodah zarah, peos, cross-dressing, gashing over the dead, tattoos, which are also included in that. So the topic is not broken up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next. Yeah. Okay. So then he says, "Im kol svara zo," with all the svara, efshar levar es hahaba amina shebapir shemishnayos she'in lokin al bluris mishum lav shebaklalos. Oh, I meant to do this before we started. Okay, so I kept saying I was going to do this. I'm going to just read the lav shebaklalos definition from the Steinsaltz. Is a prohibition stated in general terms. A prohibition of the Torah containing several particular prohibitions of different kinds. The famous one is lo sochlu al hadan, right? Don't eat over the blood. Contains several prohibitions, among them the prohibition against eating an animal before it is completely dead, the prohibition against eating a sacrificial animal before its blood has been sprinkled on the altar, and the prohibition forbidding judges who have condemned a man to death from eating food on the day of his execution. No punishment is administered by an earthly court for the violation of such a prohibition, even if one violates all the individual prohibitions at once. Now, I don't know the philosophy behind that, but that's the rule, is you don't get malchus on the lav shebaklalos. Okay, so now it's possible to explain the Rambam's hava mina in the Pirush Mishnayos that you don't get malchus on a bluris because it's a lav shebaklalos. Shebepirish Mishnayos savar haRambam deika rak inyan echad shel chukos hagoyim. In the Pirush Mishnayos, the Rambam held that there was one inyan of chukos hagoyim, v'hu inyan haklali, and that's the universal. Shenivna miyisurim yuchadim kagon menach yukosim. He only held by chukos hagoy as a universal, and there are many things that come under that heading, including menachish and stuff. Became she'ain pasuk miyuchad lebluris, and since there's no specific pasuk for bluris haircut, tiye bluris asura rak bezesh shehi min klal chelik min klal. Then bluris is only asur because it falls under the general heading. Ve'inze ela lav shebaklalos, and that would be a lav shebaklalos, and you couldn't get malchus on it. Ulam behilchos avodah zarah chukos hagoyim. Sorry, in the halachos of, I think he means of the actual chukos hagoyim. Higdir Rambam deika gamkin iser shel chukos hagoyim beprat. By the time he gets to the Mishnah Torah, he says that there's also particular isurim of chukos hagoyim, v'hu asur laharos es atmo kimishtatef b'inyan haklali, which is to act as though or demonstrate your relation to the universal. And you could get malchus on that particular isser. Okay, fine. We're not in the sugya of lav shebaklalos, but you could see the general contours of the svara. Hamachaber lamad kishitas haramam elashu savar deika gamkin inyan acher shebo marha gabra eschalaso. Okay, so the Machaber and the Shulchan Aruch learned, like the Rambam, that there is also but also held. So he's saying that the Machaber holds like the Rambam, but he holds that there's another way that the Gabra demonstrates his halos, v'hu ha'achila, and that's eating. Ukamosha nira lamashal midin ben sora mora. Just like we see the ben sora mora, what's the essential thing that defined him as a ben sora mora is the way he eats, right? So Machaber is saying that if you eat like an ovid of avodah zarah, that can also partake of the isser of chukos hagoy. Now, how do you eat like an ovid of avodah zarah? By saying, oh no, there are crumbs on the table, I have to bring another loaf because otherwise it's bad luck, you know? So he says, "Mechaber kasav din hasuda b'simin kuf ayin tes she'achila b'kaseh havya chelak mihilchos me'onein ela shehu himshich as far as haramim lichlo achila gamkein ba'isra gabra laharas as atmo kamish shayach leading a klal shechukos hagoyim." So the Mechaber puts this eating thing in kuf ayin tes because it's part of hilchos me'onein, but he extends the svara of the Rambam to include an achila that is as an isser of the Gabra to demonstrate his relationship to the inyan aklali of chukos goy. Was that called gimel, sif gimel, b'soch siman kuf ayin ches gamkein. That's why he includes it in both simanim, is that it's for me'onin and it's also for Chukos Goy. Okay, fine. But after Koze, Yesh Levaer, this is the last paragraph, yeah. Shahefech Sha'inyan Chukos Goy Haklali, Hu V'halachta Bidracha. I should have asked you what you thought it was. The Isser, so you don't walk in the Chukos Goy. That's to live the life of the irrational. The opposite of that is v'halachta bidracha, which is to walk in the ways of God, which the Rambam defines as living the rational life, because he literally says the mitzvah is to follow the middle path, and he says one who follows the middle path is called a chacham, right? That's his formulation there. Ratzon lomar chai hachachma, the life of chachma. Alzeh ein hashvayus b'hilchos deos perak aleph halachos hey through vav l'umas hilchos chukos hagoyim b'perak yud aleph halacha aleph, right? So that's what we saw in the okay, well, that was what I was referencing, but then he quotes something else, which is so that's the one where he talks about how, like, Yisrael are different than the other, than the goyim, and we don't live the irrational life, right? Like all the stupidity. V'od shehefech shel chukos goy haprati shelo laharos es atma b'inyan haklali hu ke'ein ma shekasa b'hilchos deos perak hey halacha aleph. Okay, so we read that halacha. Ela yi ha'Yisraeli muvdal mehem v'yadu b'mabusha uv'shar ma'asav. Israel should be distinct in its garments and the rest of his actions. Kamoshu muvdal mehem b'madal uv'deosav. Just like he's separate in his mind and his deos. Okay, and that is very similar to Hilchos Deos, where he's talking about the Deos of Chachamim, Kishem Shachacham Nikar B'Chachmas Over Deosov, just like the Chacham is distinguished in his wisdom and his character traits, who moved out Behen Mishar Ha'am, and he's separated from the rest of the people. Kach Tark Shihe Nikar B'Masav, B'Ma'achala, B'Mashkeo, B'Ilasa, B'Siyas Saracha, B'Dibro, B'Yilucho, B'Mabusha, B'Chilchu Dvarav, B'Masav, B'Matana, B'Yu, Kol Hamasim Ha'ela, Nine Musukan B'Yoser. The Chacham should be distinguished in all these ways from the rest of the people. So in other words, on a Klal Yisrael level, we distinguish ourselves from the non-Jews in our dress, our hair, and our buildings, which reflect the status of someone who lives a life of chachma as opposed to one who lives the irrational life. And that's analogous to in Deos, chachamim have to go above the rest of the nation and be distinguished in their, in all these qualities as well. Yeah. Okay, so the upshot is don't live the irrational life. No, the upshot is that, yeah. So the upshot is Chukos Hagoyim is it's Hilchos Avodah. I think the easiest way to summarize it, where we'll remember it, is Hilchos Avodah Zarah v'Chukos Hagoyim. So Avodah Zarah is the worship of another god. Okay, Chukos Hagoyim is the Torah's prohibition of the soil or the backdrop which Avodah Zarah takes root in, which is the irrational life of taiva, and taiva influenced thinking and imagination influenced thinking. So the Torah does this in a general way and a particular way. The general way is prohibiting all of these superstitious practices and beliefs in fortune telling and lucky times and unlucky times and omens and all this other stuff, because all those things are gateways. You can't be an Ovid of Avodah Zarah, worshiping another god, without being steeped in this way of thinking. Like, this way of thinking is what gives rise to that. In fact, my favorite definition of Avodah Zarah is what Rebbe said on the Avodah Zarah shirim, which is the essence of Avodah Zarah is relating to the products of your psyche as a reality. Okay, you have a psyche and it can influence you, but to say, well, okay, I have this deep insecurity, so I'm going to project that there is this like magical force that if I relate to in a certain way, then I can control reality. That's treating your imaginary friends as real, So that's the essence of Avodah Zarah. But that doesn't just emerge in a vacuum. That emerges from many irrational ways of relating to the world, right? So when you hear the birds chirping, when you see the black cat crossing your path and say, that means I'm going to fail in my business, I better avoid going to work today, or someone says, certain words, and you think that those words have power. That's all. These are all like ways that reinforce irrational thinking, which allows Avodah Zarah ideologies to sprout. So the Torah is prohibiting that in a universal way, and then giving specific prohibitions for Israelites identifying themselves externally as relating to that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. It's a marvelous system, if I may say so myself. Yeah.
I like what I said yesterday.
Yeah.
I think it's almost was right at the end, but it's like when in like a TV show or like fiction, they go into like the evil alternate universe. Mm-hmm. So it's like this is evil alternate not 7.
It is. Yeah, right. It is. Yeah. Yep.
The bizarre world.
Yeah,
version.
upside down. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, nice. All right, good. So let's stop here. And we have one more